Hey guys, it's Charlie from Reader Turned Writer, and today I wanted to do a review of the series Children of the Promise by Dean Hughes. Really quickly, the books in the series are Rumors of War, Since You Went Away, Far From Home, When We Meet Again, and As Long As I Have You. When I was in high school, my mom actually gave me some of these books. Not the whole series, but maybe the first couple of books in the series, because the title is Rumors of War, and I've never really been into books about war, except for maybe the American Revolution. I never picked them up, but when I was going through all of the books that I own and reading the ones that I hadn't read before, this series was one that I knew I needed to get to. And I was really nervous to read it because it's about World War II, and World War II is actually not something that I've really ever been that interested in. When I learned about it in school, I always felt like I was kind of bored, and I know that's horrible because I know World War II is really, really important. The details of the fighting and everything, I never got into it. I always felt bored learning about it. But I was so pleasantly surprised reading this book. Instantly, I got into it. The first 2 pages, I was like, oh my gosh, I already love this book. I am so interested in this. The books were not perfect, but they were so well done. They were well researched, interesting, the tension level was perfect, the characters felt real, there was so much character development and growth, and I learned so much, and I also felt like it changed my view of the world and my perspective of how I look at things and made me think about things I've never thought about before, and it actually has opened up a whole new world to me because now I'm actually interested in reading more about World War II, and I come across things where I'm like, hey, I've learned about that, and it makes me more interested to learn more, and I'm so glad I read these books. I would recommend these to everybody. Like, if you're watching this video and you've never read this series, you should go get this series because it is life-changingly good. This series is an LDS historical fiction set in World War II. It's not a book that you can only read if you're LDS. It's not even, I feel, as LDS-centric as some of Gerald Lund's books. But going into it, you will want to know that it does focus on the LDS Church, but I do think that he explains really well, and he also shows a lot of other vantage points besides LDS. The book follows the Thomas family. They are living in Salt Lake City, and their oldest son is out on a mission in Germany right before World War II starts, and he gets out with the other missionaries as the war starts. In Germany, it follows a family that he was teaching that convert to the LDS Church, and then it also follows the Thomas family as they are pulled in different directions because of the war, and it looks at things in Hawaii, in Germany, in England some of the time, in the Philippines, and what it's like to be a prisoner of war, and what it's like to be fighting in the war, and what it's like to be a nurse in the war, and what it's like to have family that dies or that gets taken away because of the war, and what it's like to come back in the 5th book, to come back from the war and try and live a normal life after everything that they went through, which was, a lot of it was just horrendous. He delves into things about World War II that I didn't know and that I never thought about before. Really quickly, some of the more negative things about this book. First, he does do some exposition, especially with history. This is especially common at the beginning of chapters so that we kind of get a bearing on where we are in the war. Or he also switches vantage points between the different children and the parents of the family, and sometimes the German family, and so there are a lot of different perspectives in the book, and as we're switching to the new perspective, sometimes a lot has happened and he has to fill you in on what has happened. Especially with the historical part of it, that could be hard to get through, but it's only a couple paragraphs usually, and the majority of the book he doesn't do that. It's just every once in a while I noticed that, and it was harder to get through that part. I also wasn't sure about the 5th book at first because the 5th book actually takes place after the war has ended, and I was like, why did he write a whole book that is 500 pages after the war has ended? Finishing the 5th book, I totally understand now because he really wanted to emphasize how hard it was for the people coming back from the war to get back into normal life, and he also wanted to show that just because the war was over didn't mean that everything was all rosy again. It was a really hard transition from the war to normal life again, even though during the war everyone kept saying everything will be good once the war is over. And also, I will say the ending, the last paragraph was so beautiful and so fitting, it brought tears to my eyes. I loved the ending so much. I totally understand now why he wrote this book. So the pacing was fantastic in this book. The tension level for me was absolutely perfect. I am not one who loves high tension books because I don't like that, oh no, something horrible is going to happen. But during this book, there's a lot of tension because you know some of what's going to happen with the war. And there's the whole tension where you're feeling the same thing as the family. Like, what if they don't make it back? What if one of them dies in the war? What if? I loved that because it helped me really understand the characters better. One of the other things I really loved about Dean Hughes is the way that he talks about the LDS Church. He brought up a lot of the problems with LDS culture and some of the views that other people have on the church. He really showed some of the valid concerns that non-LDS people have with the LDS culture and the church in general. He really explored that in a deeper way than I've ever seen any author do. And it made me think about my church and my culture in different ways and the way that I view the world. Like, am I like that because of my religious views? But he, at the same time, really stood up for the church and for the gospel, and you could tell that Dean Hughes has a testimony of the church because of the way that he portrays his characters. One of the sons starts off with a really weak testimony and really isn't sure about where to go in life or what kind of person he even is, and he ends up as a prisoner of war. And I'm not giving away a lot with this, but as he goes through that experience strengthens his testimony, and then his testimony gets him through the hard things that he needs to get through, and I loved that. It was beautiful. Another thing that I really loved was the emphasis on strong families. Throughout the whole book, what got all the characters through the hard things that they were going through and through the war was their family. The soldiers would think about their family at home and think, I have to get home to them. In the war camps, when the Philippine soldiers were taken captive by the Japanese and were treated horribly, they made their own little families in the camps. And that's what got them through, was those people. They would bond together in groups of 3 or 4 and get each other through. And when one of them was weak, the others would pull them along and strengthen them. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful. While he emphasized strong families and strong marriages, he also explored the idea of what happens when the husband thinks he's in charge of his wife. And he really explored marriage in a really deep way, because the husband and wife of the Thomas family, they have a good marriage, but they also have problems with their marriage, and you see throughout the whole series how they work together to overcome some of those problems and try and become better for each other, and how that makes their marriage a lot better. I really love the emphasis that our relationships and our families, whether they're families that we were born into or families that we create around ourselves, can get us through really hard situations, and that for those families we can both get through hard situations but also become better people and work to change to become better people. The last plus for me of this book was that I just learned so much. I learned so much about World War II, I learned so much about LDS Church history, things that I hadn't known or thought about before, and I'm so grateful for Dean Hughes for all of the work that he put in to make this a very accurate portrayal of World War II. He talks about it before and after some of the books, all of the work that he went into and how he tried so hard to keep all the details straight, but also to really reflect what it was really like to be in those situations that he wrote about, and I love that. One of the themes that this series explored really well was the us versus them mindset. It really talks a lot about how World War II was created based on the idea of us versus them. This isn't just with the Nazis and the Jews, because it happened with everybody in World War II. The Americans versus the Japanese, they would call them Japs, and they looked down on Japanese, and pretty much everybody knows that there were American citizens who were of Japanese descent that were put into camps during World War II unjustly, just in case. And it was really a us versus them. We hate the Japs, we hate the Japanese for what they did to us. We would never do that as Americans, only the Japanese would. It happened with the Germans, it happened with everybody. And a lot of the hatred that came up because of World War II was caused by thinking us versus them rather than thinking we're all human beings. And I think that's a really applicable idea today. I see it in everything. In feminism, a lot of feminists have turned feminism into a men versus women, us versus those men. They aren't as good as us. They oppress us. They versus us. Where really it should be, we need to all be kind to one another and all respect one another and And in a marriage, it shouldn't be you versus your husband, it should be you working together with your husband. You can see it in race, in politics. Politics is huge. Democrats versus Republicans versus whatever party you are, at least in the US. My husband read somewhere that Democrats and Republicans are more polar in their views than ever since America's been founded. It should never be an us versus them. I see Republicans and Democrats all the time on Twitter or Facebook saying things like, oh, look at how horrible this Democrat is. They said this and this and this and this. We would never. They do it because they're horrible, but we're so good. We would never do such and such and such and such. And that is not the attitude that we need to be having. So if I've learned anything from reading about World War II, it's to be more accepting, more loving, more kind, and more Christ-like. I feel like I have a lot of strong opinions on certain topics, and I am definitely passionate about my beliefs, and I like to share those with people. But I don't ever want to turn it into an us versus them. I always want to be able to try and understand the other person and to love them even if they have different views than me. There's a quote in the 5th book that I thought really wrapped all those ideas up really nicely, and I'm going to share it with you. It's one of the characters talking, and he says, "We all want to think that the world is divided into two great armies, good on one side and evil on the other. But good and evil are in all of us, and sometimes the evil is only held back by a thin thread. Still, it's that thread that makes all the difference." I love these books. I am so grateful that I read them, and I really hope that I can take the things that I learned and make myself a better person because of it. I also am really excited to go forward and read more quality historical fictions and to learn more about World War II especially. I would definitely recommend reading this book if you are interested in historical fiction, especially LDS or World War II fiction, and I definitely don't think you need to be LDS to read this book. I also will say that if you don't think you're interested in World War II, I still think you should give it a shot because that was me before I read these books. I didn't think I was that interested in World War II, and these books changed my entire perspective on it. Have you read the Children of the Promise series by Dean Hughes? Or have you read any other good World War II historical fictions? If so, let me know in the comments below so that I can go and check them out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.